This episode was brought to you by Resilient Nutrition. Pals, greetings, and once again, welcome to another episode of Everything Endurance. It is, and I know I always say it, but I always mean it, a pleasure to have you with us again today. For those of you watching on YouTube, a bit of a different backdrop than you're used to. I have in fact moved house a week ago, and I think I'm still trying to pick my sweet spot in here for where I'm actually going to do the recording from, but I like this. You know, a couple of pot plants behind over my shoulder. Nice stripy wallpaper. Might be a bit jarring to look at, but you let me know in the feedback. To anyone that's just listening to this, sorry, that was a very visual section of the podcast, but there won't be another one. We'll move on from there. Yeah, it's great to be talking to you, but I'm going to talk to somebody, a person, very directly right now. I just wanted to wish a massive congratulations to Adam Kimball. Adam Kimball, our BTU race director over in the US, a man we haven't been able to see since before the first lockdown started. We've been desperately short of extremely tall, beardy, delightful, talented ultra runners in our lives since that time, and we can only hope we're reunited soon enough and I can clink a drink with you in person and say this congratulations face to face. But yeah, just bagged himself a top 10 finish at the Leadville 100. It's not even the first time he's done that either, such is this man's talent. Go back and search for the Adam Kimball episode that we did after he broke Kilian Jornet's record on the Tahoe Rim Trail, and you'll get a measure of what I'm talking about. The card-carrying, loveliest guy I have ever met. So yeah, congratulations, Kimball. Kimbaldor. It's I'm well chuffed for you, pal. Hope you're doing well. Moving on. I'm not going to attend to any other business today. I think we're just going to leap straight into this one. It's this was a podcast episode where I think I was a complete fanboy throughout. This is a runner who I've been well aware of for a good few years, but who I haven't actually sort of come in direct contact with at any point. This is a runner who sort of absolutely dominated the spine over a couple of years before I was working there, has been around the world, and you've go and check out her website. I mentioned this later in the podcast, that you should go and have a look on her website and have a look at her CV. It is a list of course records and podium finishes interspersed with a couple of major records as well. She jointly holds the FKT for an unsupported Cape Wrath Trail run with Damien Hall, and she's up there alongside Kilian Jornet with having a Bob Graham round FKT to her name as well. She's just come back from Chamonix. She is off the back of a year where she has bagged herself a win at the Western States 100. And the Western States 100, we talk about this in the podcast too. Go and read the books, go and look it up. It's part of the history and folklore of the ultra running scene. And she's just bagged herself a win there, which is absolutely epic. We are, of course, going to be talking today to Beth Pascall. Beth, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast and for allowing me to trap you in a Zoom call on the hottest day, I think, in the history of the Earth. Apologies if I am. For anyone watching on YouTube, apologies for the light glistening off my very, very sweaty head today. Are you happy to be back in the UK? I guess it's been a couple of months for you now since the Western States and stuff, but you were away for a good while there.
Yeah, I've been, as we were saying before we started recording, I think home for only about 2 weeks since the end of March. So yeah, I got back from the Alps last week actually, and it is nice to be home. Yeah, it's nice to be back in some form of routine, and I'm back at work now as well, which is nice for now. Actually, I'm enjoying it. I don't know how long that will last, but yeah, it's good to be back in Derbyshire.
It's always good to be in Derbyshire, I find. I'm not too far from you. I'm just up in Sheffield myself. Yeah, obviously you've had a bit of an action-packed 2021. There was a Canyons 100k, Western States 100, and obviously a bit of time in the Alps as well for the UTMB. Maybe not quite the result that we'll be focusing on today, but it's an amazing running journey you've been on over the last few months. I've been watching with jealousy. It must be...
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and after a year being cooped up as well through 2020, it must have been a very enjoyable experience to be able to get out and stretch your legs somewhere so wonderful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
Is that part of what draws you into this type of events? Is it a love of those views, those hills, those amazing sights that you get?
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. And yeah, like, when I first got into running, it was, in part about kind of pushing myself and trying to run distances that I didn't know that I could possibly run. So kind of a journey of self-discovery, but also it was, being in cool places, and, you can push yourself to the same limits on the roads if you want to. But yeah, certainly I've always enjoyed being off-road, being in the mountains, and my running has given me the opportunity to travel and go to some places that I certainly never would have gone to otherwise.
And I've skipped ahead a little bit there. You just mentioned the Alps and got me all excited for mountains. But I want to go back a little bit further, because it's the first time we've spoken to you on the podcast. It's you're one of those names that has been, I feel like, has been floating around me for the last sort of 5 or 6 years that I've been involved in the ultra running scene. I sort of got involved with the Spine race after you'd come in and dominated that and gone again. And it's always been in my notebook to contact Beth Pascall, and now here we finally are. So I'd like to hear a little bit about how you came to be the runner that you are now, if you don't mind delving into your history a little bit. Yeah,
sure. I've been running ultras for about 8 or 9 years, I think now. I slightly lose track. Perhaps it's not quite that long. But I've always run a little bit. I can't remember a time where I've not run at all, but certainly, I ran at school. I did some cross country and athletics and things. I wouldn't say I was good at it, but I wasn't like anything super special. And then it was in the last couple of years of medical school that I started running a bit more, discovered the trails and discovered running ultras. So I read a few books, I think, that kind of opened my eyes to this new world that I didn't know existed before. And as I mentioned before, it started out as purely just, that sounds really crazy, I wonder if I can do that. And it certainly was never about trying to run fast or trying to be good at it. It was purely kind of, I was just intrigued that this sport existed. And then over the years, I think when I started running ultras, I was immediately okay at it. I kind of started to think, a couple of years in, I could be good at this, and gradually started to train a bit more and take it a bit more seriously. And that's how things have progressed really over the years.
And were you like a desperately competitive youth when it came to sport? Or, I mean, I've interviewed people at both ends of the scale, people that were into football and rugby and whatever sport that was thrown at them when they were younger and wanted to win at everything, and people who seemed to stumble into ultra running accidentally in their late 20s or early 30s. Which sort of camp do you think you'd put yourself in?
I think if you ask any of my friends or family, they would say I was super competitive as a child. Yeah. I wouldn't say, like, now, I don't think I'm as like super competitive as a lot of the people I race against. I wouldn't say in most aspects of life I'm that competitive anymore, but certainly as a child I was. Yeah.
And I suppose that does seem to be an aspect of the ultra runners that I've interviewed, is that although you might describe some of them as competitive in the sense that they're always trying to beat their last result or to see what the limits of their abilities are, it's not necessarily that they're desperately trying to grab a podium or to be the most well-known ultra runner that's out there. Would you say that's the same for you as well? Although I guess no one's going to sit there and say, no, I want to beat everybody. You know?
Well, I think it's interesting. And I think you don't necessarily have to be like super competitive to be an ultra runner, because you're largely like running your own race, right? And it's yes, sometimes it's about, you know, tactics relative to your competition, but often it's you go out, you run your own race, and if you win, you win. If you come second, you're second. The gaps are not always, but tend to be, you know, larger than in shorter races for obvious reasons. So yeah, I don't think you need to be as competitive to be a good ultra runner. Compared to, say, you know, if you're doing team sports or running shorter distances. But
were you someone that was, you know, maybe out there running already and started building those distances up, or there seem to be other people that come more from the background where they were already hiking a lot, doing a lot of distance in the hills, and it's more that they start picking up the speed a little bit? Where were you?
Somewhere in between, I guess. So I never really, I mean, I reckon probably the longest I've ever been without running since I was about 5 is probably 2 weeks. I would guess. Like I never was completely inactive. When I started university, I took up rowing, and I was a lightweight rower for a few years. And I think like my strong endurance background kind of comes from that. It gave me a good base. So when I then started running, I was quite good at it straight away. So yeah, like I've done stuff in the mountains. I've done a fair bit of hiking as well. But yeah, it's not like I was, you know, a competitive runner for my whole youth and then suddenly decided to start ultras.
You say as well that you kind of started building up and starting to hit the ultras during the last couple of years of medical school. And you're a doctor. You are a doctor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you could have picked a more demanding career to go into and balance ultra running against as well. Do you find that, although not physically restful, is the time out in the hills maybe where you get your rest from the career?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I've thought a lot about why I need to run. And yeah, like I just don't feel like if I were to come home from work and watch TV or I don't know, do something else, it just doesn't have the same effect. Like, you know, when I'm having downtime, and not running so much, yeah, I'm just not. I'm just not as. I'm not as happy. I don't have as much energy. I feel a bit sluggish. I probably don't concentrate as well. Yeah, so I can't like pinpoint exactly what it is, but I need something. I need to be active in order to kind of function well at work, I think.
And I think that's something I've heard from quite a lot of ultra runners. There's quite a few ultra runners that I've interviewed over the time that I've been doing this who are sort of living the van life. Running is what they do. They're out in the hills all the time, and that's great. But there's an equal amount of them that have extremely demanding careers and seem to take something sort of meditative from the time out on the trail. It's sort of time that you're claiming back. I mean, I don't know why I hesitate to use the word spiritual here, but there does seem to be something about it that's definitely very beneficial on a mental level as well as a physical level. And would you say that's a big part of what drives you to keep going?
Yeah, I think it must be, even though it's, I don't come back from a run and feel, I don't feel anything spiritual when I'm out running, you know what I mean? But yeah, there must be something in that. And it must sort of reset me in some way. Yeah, for sure. Although it's not as, you can't, it's nothing that you can really put words to or something. It's, difficult to pinpoint. But yeah, there must be something in that.
I feel tremendously guilty with this line of questioning in a way, because I've sort of launched this at quite a few ultra runners, and nobody has a definitive answer for what it is that keeps them going. And I look through your CV, which is obscene, by the way. If anyone listening to this, you should definitely go and have a look at bethpascall.com, because I mean, you go back to 2015, first the spine race, second Dragon's Back. You keep going up this CR. Like, you seem to really hit the ground running with this, and you haven't shied away from some extremely difficult races that demand an awful lot from you mentally as well as physically. So, with your back against the wall in a race like the Spine or the Dragon's Back or something like that, what do you think it is that you focus on then that keeps you going just within that event?
I think, going back to, like a year like 2015, those races were very much like the reasons I got into ultra running in the first place. Like, I don't know if I can do that. I want to try and prove something to myself. I genuinely don't know if I can run 268 miles. It's about, it's kind of curiosity. And like that sense of adventure, when you start something new, everything is kind of super exciting and a new experience. And like why I keep going, I don't know. I was just stubborn, I guess. No reason to stop. But yeah, it's about kind of proving something to yourself, I think. And certainly, back then there was no external pressure from sponsors or anybody else. And I think sort of since then, my running has evolved slightly. And now clearly a bit more competitive. And it's not so much about like trying to do things that it's not about completing things. It's about trying to win races, I guess. And it's a different challenge, like I know I can run 100 miles if I want to. It's not easy. I can't finish it every time, but it's about, trying to race. And that's a slightly different challenge, I would say. You have to take more risk, and it doesn't always go smoothly. But it's a cool challenge.
I think anybody that's involved in ultra running knows that it definitely doesn't always go smoothly. Have there been many events that you've gone into that you haven't managed to finish, that you've come away from and you just haven't managed to make that finish line? And how did they make you feel when that comes up? I know this is sort of straight off the back of UTMB, but how have you found that experience? Because that's the other end of the sort of elation that ultra runners get just from completing a challenge they've set themselves, let alone winning. A fair few races, I would say. and most of the times when everyone's got them.
Most of the times when I haven't finished, it's like there's been a good reason for it, I think, and probably going into the race it was fairly predictable. Like the first couple of times I didn't finish a race, I was devastated. Right? Because you put, you can't, as an ultra runner, you don't race many times a year. You put so much into these things. The first few times I felt, like, what have I done wrong? I've wasted all this time. I'm a failure and things like that. And I'm weak, or I don't know. But now I think I've realized that it is just part of the sport. And yes, like, so in case the listeners weren't aware, I DNF'd at UTMB last a week or so ago. And yeah, like, I was upset for a couple of days. Like, I care about it. It's normal. But then you just move on, right? Like, it's, like, I knew going into it, there was a good chance I wasn't going to finish. Like, you don't do these things unless if you know that, you're certain that you can finish or you can win or something. But then, yeah, you just move on and accept that it's part of it and you've learned something from it. And yeah, it's strange, really, because when races go well, like winning Western States was really cool. But then 2 weeks later, or say like 10 days later, was I any happier like 10 days after Western States than winning Western States than 10 days after DNFing at UTMB? And probably I feel exactly the same, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question at all.
No, I think it sort of does. And I think you make a very good point there, that sort of 10 days after the fact, when you've had time to look back and reflect on it, do you feel much different? Well, if anything, a DNF is possibly more of a learning experience for you for the next time around. And as you said, if you look back at the races in 2015, these were races that you were entering thinking, can I even do this? Not can I win this, but can I even complete this? And I don't think ultra running really allows you to lose that completely, because you can be as good a runner as you want to be. 100 miles is a long way, and there are a lot of variables along the way, and there is always a chance that today's going to be the day when the answer is no, I can't actually do that today. But there's plenty to be taken away from it. Are there lessons that you can say right now you directly take away from your experience at UTMB?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that probably back in 2015, I would want to finish a race at all costs, because finishing a race was the aim, right? Whereas now, like, if I'd had the kind of race in 2015 that I was having at UTMB last week, I could have finished, right? I could have put one foot in front of the other for another 20 hours. maybe it would have been longer than that. I don't know. Like, I could have done it, but it would not have been good for like my physical health. And I didn't feel like I had anything to prove to myself, right? So yeah, I think my kind of criteria for not finishing a race have changed a bit, and I always have a plan in advance about when am I going to stop. And sometimes it'll be I will finish at all costs, and sometimes it'll be something else. But yeah, for me, UTMB this year, I know that I can't run Western States or a 100-miler at the end of June, and then run another mountain 100-miler a couple of months later. And it's in part because they are so different races. Like, you can't, you need to put so much specific training in to run in the mountains a race like UTMB. And UTMB, which is basically a hiking race, Western States is a running race. They're so different, and there's just not enough time between the races to prepare, but also recover. So I was tired primarily, but also in part, perhaps I just hadn't done enough specific training in the mountains. So I know now that when I'm planning my season, I have no regrets about it. Like, I knew it was going to be touch and go. But it was something I was up for trying, and now I've tried it and I know it doesn't work. So in the future, I'll plan my season differently.
Fantastic. And you still got a tour of the Alps. you've had an educational experience out of this. It's all a positive in the grand scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, like I knew there was a good chance that it wasn't going to go well. So that the time in the Alps beforehand, we tried to not think about the race too much, and yeah, like you're thinking about it when you're training, but not make it the kind of one overriding goal at the end of it. Try and have a nice time as well. So, and we did that. It was great being out there for a month or so. So, yeah, lots of positives to take away.
Hi everyone, sorry to interrupt. Just here to remind you that this episode was brought to you by Resilient Nutrition, and you can find their full range of elite long-range fuels exclusively on the BTU store now. The elite long-range fuels are a series of delicious nut butter products with micronutrients and supplements designed to give you exactly what you need when you need it. They're delicious, they're great for fueling your whatever your adventure is, and you can find them on the BTU store and nowhere else right now. Store.beyondtheultimate.co.uk. That's store.beyondtheultimate.co.uk. Okay, let's get back to the podcast. This year, you've got a good few races in it, and I know I struck on this earlier. It must have felt good to get out and get some racing in again after 2020, when we all just watched every racing and event company in the world have to grind to a halt for a while there. Obviously, not the biggest problem going on in the world in the grand scheme of things, but disruptive for a runner's calendar. But not that you sat back and did nothing with that time. Your Bob Graham record that you tucked in 2020 as well. Is that something you'd had your eye on for a good while? It's always something I've wanted to do, but I had no plan to do it anytime soon. And yeah, when the pandemic came along, it was the obvious thing for me to do, I guess. You and every other ultra runner in the UK. There was a point last year where I was recording an episode like every 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. I can believe it.
But I mean, that must have been an absolutely wonderful experience, and that's a very, very strong record that you set there. Did that give you some confidence carrying you into 21? Because I could understand how having a year off, there might be some trepidation returning to racing again, but you were coming in with sort of a big notch there, having knocked off that record. How are you feeling returning to racing this year?
Yeah, I think you're right. Like you are a bit. I mean, at the beginning of every season, you do worry a bit. Like, do I still have what it takes? Like, am I fit? Like, it's difficult to gauge often being an ultra runner, because if you're running track or marathon or something, you tend to have a good idea in training, right? What times you're running and things. So yeah, like that confidence is really important, and for sure, the Bob Graham gave me a bit of confidence, but also, yeah, going into 2021, I knew I was fit. I just had this feeling in training. I just felt different, and yeah, it wasn't so much about running specific times or anything. I just felt good. So I was confident, but then that doesn't mean everything. So I still was a little bit nervous about how things would pan out, especially as I'd taken some time off work and planned to be abroad for a good period of time. Yeah.
And was that about preparation for the Western States 100 that you sort of took all that time over in the States before the event?
Yes, pretty much. Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, in the age of social media, I feel like I'm spying on people some of the time. I'm desperately sorry to be discussing the minutiae of your movements over the last few months, but was that what part of that was about? Sort of an acclimatization and a preparation process for Western States?
Yeah. Yes. So in part, being able to train in the specific conditions. So be at altitude, be able to train in the heat, but also just to have a bit more time and not be really tired and sleep deprived all the time, which I am when I'm working, just to see if that would make a difference, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, it seems to have. A fantastic result came out of the other end of that. Was the plan always to do the what was it, the Canyon 100 or Canyons 100K? Was the plan always to hit that race while you were out there as well?
No, it wasn't always the plan. I planned to. Well, I did plan to go out early and race in April in the US. So I was going to race Lake Sonoma 50. That was cancelled, and then I had an entry for a race called Miwok 100, which was then cancelled, and then Canyons came up, and that was going ahead. So I took the opportunity and raced that instead, it worked super well, actually.
No, fantastic. Well, I mean, you came first. I think that definitely qualifies as super well as results go.
Yeah, but also, I mean, it wasn't a goal like in its own right. It was about racing in the US and getting some confidence going into Western states, which it helped with.
And has this been a bit of a long-term goal for you, getting into some of the bigger US races? Because a lot of the people I interview, and I know we said this off air just before I started recording, I really haven't had an opportunity to talk to that many people who've done some of the bigger US races. It's part of the reason I was sort of excited to talk to you about it today. Is that something that's been on your radar for a good while? And I know you had done the Western States before.
Yeah, it's a race that I've always wanted to run. Well, it was a race that I've always been aware of because it was the race I'd read about in books. You know, if you read sort of Born to Run or Scott Jurek's or any of those books of that era, that you hear about Western States. And so it was always on my radar, but I never thought I'd have the opportunity to race because it's so hard to get into if you go through the lottery. And then I was lucky enough to get a place in 2019 through the Ultra Trail World Tour. And I absolutely loved it. I just loved everything about that race. I loved sort of the American ultra running scene. I was, when I had the opportunity to come back this year, there was no way I was going to turn it down. So it's different. I really like the slightly smaller races. It's got more of a community feel. It just feels like quite an intimate environment, and I just love everything about that race.
So plenty of training going on in those sort of few weeks while you were over in the US. What does training look like for Beth Pascall? So I've spoken to ultra runners who are very much, I do what my body feels. I just enjoy the miles, and other people who have spreadsheets for everything. And I'm looking at John Kelly here. There are some people who are just extremely scientific in their approach to it. Sort of, whereabouts would you put you?
Somewhere in the middle, but towards the everything is planned end. So I'm not. Like training is. So I have a coach. I work with Martin Cox. So he is the brains behind most of it. I just do what he says. We're pretty regimented with training, which is kind of periodized throughout the year. In terms of like using data, like on a day-to-day basis, I don't use a lot. Like I don't train with heart rate or anything like that. I'm not measuring loads of metrics. All my running is done on feel. What do you know what training looks like, how I train, a bit more about that? So it's completely different at different points of the year. Like what I'm doing right now is, very little. What I'll be doing in January will look very different to what I'm doing in June, and then in August. So in the build up to Western States, actually over the winter I did some kind of shorter, faster running. So I don't bother with long runs in the hills in the winter. I try and kind of work on speed and running economy, and then get a bit more specific when it comes to the big races.
You can see that in your CV. You've got a couple. Was it Seville Marathon 2 hours 40? So you have a fast marathon time there as well.
Well, it's okay. It's all relative. I'm not that fast.
Look, mine was 5 hours 40 the first time I did one, so don't tell me that's not fast now.
So that's an example. I ran a marathon in the winter a couple of years ago. So before Western States, I was training up in Flagstaff in Arizona, and so it was really about doing a little bit of intensity. So I was doing some kind of moderate paced runs on the flat, but the emphasis was on the specific training. So I was doing long runs in the Grand Canyon, which might be kind of 4, 5. I think I did a rim. Yeah, I did a rim to rim that was 8.5 hours. But trying to train in the same conditions, so in the dryness, in the heat, on similar types of trails if possible, and doing all my specific runs at 100-mile pace or 100-mile intensity anyway. And that's kind of it. I could talk a lot about training, but
no, I won't make you pick apart all the details there. But what an incredible backdrop you had for training there as well. I'm just fitting in my long runs in the Grand Canyon. I mean, you must have seen some beautiful sights while you were out there.
Yeah, for sure. Running in the canyon was really special. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we better come to the Western States 100 then. And it's really tempting for me here to just go into talking about sort of the history of that event as well. But this is very much about talking to you today. But if anyone who's listening to this doesn't know much about the Western States and why it's sort of quite important on the ultra running scene, definitely go back and read. You mentioned Born to Run earlier. I mean, anyone who's interested in this should definitely go back and read that. And you can fill in the background there rather than having me do it right now. But I'm deeply jealous. I don't know how to form this into a question. I think what I'm just trying to communicate here is that it sounds incredible. I really want to get out there and see this race myself, and I'm very jealous of you having done it. Was it as wonderful as I think it is? It looks like a staggering course.
I mean, it helps when you win. Like, you ever think is more wonderful when you win a race. And I mean, I love it. I think, as I mentioned before, it's so difficult to get into the race. And there's only 300. The number of participants varies each year, but 300 and something.
And you not only need to qualify, you also then need to come through the lottery as well. Is that right?
Yes, and it can take 8, 9, 10 years to get in through the lottery.
Wow.
There are other ways in, like I mentioned the Ultra Trail World Tour, and then there's golden ticket races, so you can win your way in as well. But what it comes down to is that for every single person there, it is a once in a lifetime, maybe, probably for most people, opportunity, and it means so much to them. And that is, you don't get that with many races, really. Yes, sometimes you have to wait 1 or 2 years, but it is just such a big deal to everybody there, which I think really makes it just makes it so special. And because it's such a small field as well, that makes it really special. It's got a real kind of family community feel, and yeah, it's a cool course. It's super varied. You start off in a ski resort at 2,000 meters, climb up a path to 2,600 meters, and then gradually descend, run through some canyons. You wade through rivers, and in the last 60 miles, it gets really, really hot. So yeah, a super interesting course. It's not easy to train for, and I love everything about it, I guess.
Having spent this time in the Grand Canyon preparing yourself for it, because as you say there, there's an incredible amount of variety on this course. I guess if you're coming straight into it not having spent any time at altitude, you're going to feel that. I know how difficult a flight of stairs is when I arrive in Cusco when we do our races over there, and that's about 2,600 meters. So and now you're running up and down mountains at that height at the beginning. You're running from snow down to sweltering temperatures at the other end. I mean, how well were you able to mimic that in your training while you were over there?
Fairly well, I guess. So the altitude, I mean, it's not, you're only at altitude for a small section of the race, really. So it's not like as important as in a race like UTMB. But yeah, for me, I really struggle with altitude. So acclimatizing was important. And then the heat, yeah, it's something that, I mean, everyone trains for it in a slightly different way. My approach was to do some runs in the extreme heat, which was very easy in the Grand Canyon. It got to around 43 degrees on a few occasions when I was running there. But at the same time, you don't want to do all your runs in that heat because, to start with, it reduces the quality of your training. Like, you're not going to be able to train that hard in that heat. And also it just takes much longer to recover. So for me, it was getting the balance between doing some runs in the heat to prepare myself, but not doing too much.
And how confident were you feeling as you came into it, having been able to sort of mimic the conditions and prepare yourself, grab this win at the Canyons? On the start line of a race that big, are you nervous? Are you focused? Are you scared? What are you feeling just as an event like this kicks off?
Yeah, all those things, I guess. Yeah, like I was fairly confident, but not to the extent that I mean, I knew I was in good shape, but not to the extent where I thought I'm definitely going to win this. I thought I am one of 6 girls who have the potential to maybe win it. As soon as we set off, I stopped being nervous and I was just super comfortable, super happy to be running. I knew straight away that I was feeling good. I wasn't as nervous. I would say I was probably more nervous like 3 weeks out than I was, 5 minutes before the race. Because I knew I was ready, I guess. I don't know.
3 weeks out from an event, there's a lot to be scared of in terms of what if I twist an ankle tomorrow? What if this doesn't happen now? With 5 minutes to go, it's kind of too late to be scared now.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And how was your experience of the race overall? Because I have to say, from the outside, you seem to have that lead from early on and just hold it. Just people couldn't get close to you. Is that how it felt from the inside?
I mean, it wasn't like super easy or super smooth. I did lead from fairly early on. And I don't think, I didn't have a whole lot of information about what was going on behind me until, say, like 80 miles in. So I was just doing running my own race, really. I didn't know if the gap was like 1 minute or half an hour. I had no idea. I had plenty of rough patches, all related to the heat. But I think whenever I was having a rough patch, the girls behind me were having rough patches too. Because that's just the nature of the course, I guess.
And I got the impression from the reports that I did see that it was a particularly hot year. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it was one of the hottest in Western States history, actually. So yeah, it was. Oh, I can't remember now. I think it was a high of 41. I think.
Ouch.
Yeah, it's hot.
Yeah, absolutely. That's no kind of environment, no kind of distance to be in at 41 degrees. That must have been incredibly difficult. Were there times where you were concerned along the way that the heat was going to be too much, that it wasn't going to be the result that you got in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I had plenty of times where I got really, really hot and slowed down, and then had to take a bit of extra time at aid stations just to sit down for a minute or so, get ice everywhere, cool off a bit, just drop my core temperature a tiny bit in order to carry on. And every time I had one of those really rough patches, I was thinking, someone's definitely going to come past me now, or am I going to bounce back from this? I don't know. But after it happened a few times, I knew that, okay, I'll just take a minute here, I'll cool down a bit, and I'll be good to go again. And yeah, luckily I was every time.
So you reckon you were sort of 80-ish miles in, something like that, before you start getting information about the people that are behind you. Is there any point in a 100-mile race like that where you get to relax a little and just enjoy it, beyond the sort of 100 meters before the finish line?
I would say that I relaxed at No Hands Bridge, which is mile 97, I think.
Wow.
Because then I got some information. I knew that barring disasters, no one could catch me. But before that point, no, it was super stressful.
And was there sort of more specific training that you have to do for an event like this? Because it strikes me that it's very unique in a couple of ways, in that obviously you have this huge range of altitude and temperature as you're sort of up in the snow at the tops of the mountains, and then 41 degrees when you get down to the bottom. But also, there's 5,000 meters of climb. There's no getting around that. That's a lot of up, but there's an awful lot of down, and that must come with its own problems, surely.
Yeah.
So it's something like 5,000 up and 7,500 down, or something like that.
Yeah, and this time I did focus on. I did more vert in training than I had done the previous year. So when I did in 2019, I did really suffer on the downhills, because I'd just been training for all my training runs have been around how much ascent I needed to get in, rather than how much descent I needed to get in. So obviously, I mean, they have to be the same when you're doing a training run. But yeah, so I did focus. I did quite a lot of vert in training to make sure I was prepared, and made sure I ran the downhills kind of purposefully in training. It's often, I find it, I'm often get a bit lazy on the downhills when I'm training, but yeah, I made a big effort to train for the downhills. And I didn't have any kind of issues with my quads or anything like that this time around.
With a CV that sort of glitters like yours does, does it ever diminish that feeling as you cross the finish line? Because I can only imagine after a 97 miles of stress that it must be an elating experience as you cross a finish line like that. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I've only ever won one big race, so it's maybe if you like Jim and win multiple times, then I don't know if the feeling changes. But for me, I can't really comment because it's only happened once.
Well, I don't know. I look through your CV. I see a lot of FKTs and course records and firsts and stuff. There's certainly a great deal of achievement there. But I would like to think, and I say this as a layman, having done a handful of ultra races in the entirety of my career, that I'd like to think that you don't ever really lose that elation when you're doing a sport that asks as much of you as this one does.
No, I don't think so. But I mean, for me, like Western States has meant a lot. It's meant a lot more than any other of my results, I guess. So yeah, it was a cool feeling.
So what else is on the bucket list? If Western States was a big target for you, what have you got your sights on now, if you're allowed to give it away?
I don't know, really.
That's it. You've done everything.
No, I guess it's not about like ticking off specific races, and probably like the races I want to do in 2 or 3 years' time are different from the ones I want to do now. I still can't really let go Western States or UTMB. I mean, UTMB does scare me. Like, I've had a lot of bad experiences there, but I would really like to run it well at some point. Hard rock potentially as well is something I'd like to race. And there are plenty of other things, but like right now, I guess I want to race the most competitive races. And yeah, it's Western States and UTMB. I'm sure that will change. And there's other like smaller races I want to do as well. I still don't have a real plan for next year, but yeah, we'll see.
Well, fair enough. We like surprises. I look forward to watching you run wherever it is that you head out. Of the sort of many races and FKTs and long trails that you've done, is there anywhere that really sticks out in your mind as sort of one of your best memories? What would you say? And I know this is a horrible question because everyone says it is, but is there a race that sticks out in your head, in your experience, that you just think that was incredible? I love that.
It's difficult because all the races you enjoy the most are the races that you have a good feeling in and you're doing well, right?
Yeah.
But there are other like places I've raced which have just blown my mind. Like, I still think that Reunion, the island, which has the French island next to Madagascar, which has a race on it called Diagonale de Fou, which means Fool's Crossing, is a crazy, crazy race. And it's just so different from anything I've ever done before. And I think it's like experiences like that I think, I don't know, wow, that was really cool. That's something that I'm going to remember forever, even though I might not have had a good feeling like throughout the race.
And that's incredible. I'm really glad you've said that because I'd never heard of that race, and that gives me another Google spiral to lose myself in after this after this Zoom call is over. So thanks very much for that. And there do seem to be a lot of sort of mountain races and stuff on your CV. Is that something that you're sort of more focused on? You like time out in the mountains?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not against like running on the flat. Like as I said before, I did running on the flat in the winter. But yeah, that's kind of, I don't know what, I mean, mountains you can, like, mountains at Western States are very different from mountains at UTMB. But yeah, I would say focusing on not the flat in terms of big goals.
Well, as well as it being a sort of really big result for you, and I'm so incredibly pleased that you got to get that result at the Western States. It seemed to also be an excellent result for ultra running in general, for women in ultra running, for British ultra runners too. I mean, it was incredible for you, but I also saw a statistic that said that there were 10 women in the top 21 in that race. I just think back to, I was incredibly lucky to be there when Jasmine Paris took 12 hours off the course record at the Spine and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. It feels at the moment in ultra running that there is this, and I say this from absolutely an unqualified position as a 40-year-old bald man, but there does seem to be this, women are doing exceptionally well in this scene, and there is recognition now that absolutely women are equally as capable in this scene as anyone else who's involved in it. And results like yours just go to reinforce that. Is it important to you for those sorts of reasons as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about, when I sort of look back on my career, it's I think what will mean most is about being able to inspire people. And if I think that, my results or something I've done has inspired one woman to take up running or to do a race or something, then that makes it all worth it. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the women at Western States just were incredible. And I think, yeah, we were incredible, but also the men just weren't that smart about how they raced that day.
That doesn't sound like men. Where could an accusation like that come from? Incredible.
So yeah, it's for sure. It's a really exciting time, and yeah, I hope it continues.
Oh, wonderful. And me too, because it will give me an excuse to try and bug you again in another year or two when you pick up your next absolutely outrageous result. Look, I've come to the end of the questions that I'd written down before I started this, Beth, so I'm not going to hold you up for any longer than absolutely necessary. It just remains for me to say thank you. Thanks very much for chatting to us today. And I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, I have. Thanks a lot, Will.
No worries. You enjoy the rest of your day.
And you.